Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteus and you are watching The World Report. Let's have a look at the top headlines this hour. Israel, Hamas and international stakeholders engage in what are seen as the most serious talks in months over a potential ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas states that talks are positive and reaching a ceasefire and prisoner agreement is possible if Israel stops imposing new conditions. The Canadian government announces new border security rules to avoid a 25% tariff on Canadian goods that Trump plans to impose if tighter border security measures aren't implicated. The $900 million measures include strengthened surveillance and a joint strike force to target trans-nation organised crime. A mass grave containing the bodies of at least 100,000 people killed by the Assad regime is discovered outside the Syrian capital, Damascus. Hundreds of thousands are estimated to have been killed since 2011, since al-Assad's crackdown on protests against his rule turned into a full-scale civil war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to meet NATO Chief Mark Rutte and key European leaders in Brussels. The talks are expected to discuss the next steps on Russia's war and Donald Trump prepares to take office. United Healthcare murder suspect Luigi Mangione is indicted for murder in Manhattan. Mangione faces 11 charges, including first-degree murder and murder as an act of terrorism. The indictment alleges that he killed Thompson to influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion. NASA says the astronauts stuck on the International Space Station will have to wait even longer to get home. Butch, Wilmore and Suni Williams were due to be in space for a week in June, but technical delay means that the pair will not be back until next March or April. After over a year of devastating conflict between Israel and Gaza, a potential ceasefire and hostage exchange between Israel and Hamas appear within reach. Progress in Cairo-led negotiations raises the possibility that a deal to end the 14-month war and secure hostage releases could be just a few days away. Now, meanwhile, Hamas has also expressed possibilities of the truce. Here is the report.
Israeli officials arrived in Doha, Qatar, on Monday for talks aimed at a Gaza ceasefire and a hostage prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas. Qatar, along with the United States and Egypt, has been involved in months of behind-the-scenes negotiations for a Gaza truce and hostage release. But apart from a one-week pause in fighting late last year, during which scores of Hamas-held hostages were released in exchange for Palestinians held in Israeli jails, successive negotiations have failed to halt the war. Defense Minister Israel Katz has said that Israeli negotiators have never been closer to a deal for the release of hostages in Gaza since the November 2023 truce in the war between Israel and Hamas. As per reports, a senior Hamas official based in Doha also said that the negotiations were progressing. The release of hostages and prisoners back in November occurred as part of an exchange that secured the freedom of 240 Palestinians detained in Israeli prisons. All mediation efforts, led by Egypt, the United States and Qatar, have since then failed to secure a new truce. In the meanwhile, in September, Qatar even announced it was suspending its efforts, blaming both sides for a lack of willingness to reach an agreement. However, since Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential election in early November, diplomatic efforts have resumed, now jointly mediated by Washington, Cairo, Doha and Ankara. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now move to some news updates from North America. 20 Democratic lawmakers in the US have urged President Joe Biden's administration to stop sending offensive weapons to Israel. They cited Israel's failure to meet US demands for increased access aid to Gaza. In a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday, they called on Washington to enforce laws restricting military aid to nations committing war crimes. President-elect Donald Trump nominated Herschel Walker as the US ambassador to the Bahamas. Walker is a former football star who previously backed for the 2022 Senate race in Georgia. Republican Walker lost the 2022 race to Democratic US Senator Raphael Warnock. Walker was one of Trump's earliest 2022 endorsements. Air Canada said on Tuesday it was targeting a 36% jump in its 2028 operating revenue from the current year. Airlines worldwide are optimistic about the future of air travel, driven by a post-pandemic surge. This is because travelers have shifted their priorities from goods to experiences. Air Canada also plans to expand its network earlier this year. The Montreal-based carrier revealed plans to increase flights to China and add capacity to other Asia-Pacific routes. Joseph Korakan was convicted of a quadruple homicide in 1997. He was arrested in Indiana early on Wednesday. This marks Indiana's first execution in 15 years. He was pronounced dead at around 1 a.m. According to the Indiana Department of Corrections, his final words were, "Not really, let's get this over and done with." The United States has released Guantanamo Bay detainee Mohammed Abdul Malik Bajabu to Kenya. This brings the number of prisoners to the facility to 29. The Pentagon announced Bajabu's release on Tuesday, saying Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin had notified Congress of the decision to send him to Kenya last month. Mexican authorities have stated that people with guns can drop them off at churches for a reimbursement fee. It was announced under a new citizens disarmament program. President Claudia Sheinbaum, in a statement, encouraged residents to participate in the Yes to Disarmament, Yes to Peace program. European leaders will meet in Brussels to discuss support for Ukraine, focusing on air defense and military aid. Meanwhile, the UK has sanctioned Russian ships and Ukraine called more defense assistance. Here is the report.
European leaders, including Scholz, Meloni, Frederiksen, Tusk and possibly Macron, will gather in Brussels to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. British Foreign Minister David Lammy, EU chiefs Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa will also join the meeting. Discussions have focused on sustaining support for Ukraine, particularly bolstering its air defenses against ongoing Russian missile strikes.
Всі, хто там будуть, мають право порушувати те чи інше питання. Головне, що нас буде там об'єднувати, як зараз терміново посилити Україну.
With concerns rising over the future of US support for Ukraine once Trump takes office, European leaders are reassessing their strategy to ensure Ukraine's defense. As part of this, European leaders have explored the possibility of sending European troops to Ukraine to help secure a ceasefire, although these talks remain in early stages. However, President-elect Donald Trump has promised to end the war quickly after taking office. He is set to send his Ukraine envoy, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, to Kiev and several European capitals in early January for a fact-finding mission. Meanwhile, in Russia, authorities have arrested a suspect in connection to the bombing that killed Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov and his assistant, Ilya Polikarpov, in Moscow earlier this week. Whereas the UK has imposed sanctions on 20 Russian ships involved in transporting oil, targeting Moscow's shadow fleet, these measures are part of a broader effort to increase pressure on Russia's economy while providing further support to Ukraine. Finally, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy has continued to urge his allies for increased military support, particularly air defense systems, to help Ukraine secure a stronger position in any future peace talks. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now move to some news updates from the Indo-Pacific region. South Korea plans a roadmap for US President-elect Donald Trump's potential nuclear talks with North Korea. Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yul confirmed preparations despite disrupted ties after Seoul's political crisis. Trump has appointed Alex Wong as Deputy National Security Advisor, signaling intent to engage Pyongyang directly. Washington remains concerned over North Korea's expanding nuclear arsenal and ties with Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Macau to mark 25 years of Beijing's rule. His three-day visit includes inauguration of Macau's new leader, Sam Hao-fei. Xi urged less reliance on casinos, which make up to 80% of tax revenue. Macau returned to China in 1999 under one country, two systems. Red banners and flags lined the streets for the celebrations. Sam has pledged to diversify Macau's economy and improve livelihoods. Beijing also aims to deepen Macau's role in the Greater Bay Area. New Zealand will compensate survivors of abuse at Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital. Children were tortured there in the 1970s. Over 362 kids without mental illnesses were subjected to electroshock therapy as punishment. A new apology acknowledging torture will be issued. Survivors can claim $1,50,000 New Zealand dollars or pursue individual assessments. 22.68 million New Zealand dollars is set aside for the redress process. The inquiry revealed Indigenous Maori and disabled children were especially targeted. Hong Kong has approved 4 new cryptocurrency trading platforms, bringing the total to 7. The licensed firms include Accumulus, GBA, DFX Labs, HK Digital Asset, EX, and Thousand Whales. The city aims to boost its status as a global crypto hub. In April, Hong Kong launched Asia's first spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs. Analysts say these moves could lower ETF fees and attract more investors. Hong Kong faces stiff competition from Singapore and Dubai in this global race. Asian hedge funds are investing in Chinese tech firms like Xiaomi and Baidu, driven by AI innovation. Despite US chip export bans, China's homegrown AI tools are gaining traction. Baidu plans to launch AI glasses and expand robo-taxis, while Xiaomi leverages its Hyperos ecosystem. Fund managers highlight China's massive domestic AI market and supply chain strength. Chinese AI stocks lag US counterparts but are expected to grow in 2024. Analysts see AI transforming devices and apps for China's 1.4 billion population. Vietnam's first defense expo kicks off in Hanoi. The event showcases locally made weapons and top global arms. Firms from the US, Europe, Russia, and China are present. Vietnam's state-run Vitel will debut missile systems and drones. Iran and Israel also display weapons nearby. Vietnam aims to boost local arms production and exports. Major talks with South Korea and Czech firms are ongoing. Mass graves have been unearthed near Damascus, exposing a chilling legacy of the Assad regime. Reports suggest over 100,000 bodies may be buried at secret sites. Here is the full report.
A chilling discovery in Syria has exposed mass graves near Damascus, revealing a machinery of death under the Assad regime. Former US War Crimes Ambassador Stephen Rapp estimates over 100,000 people have been tortured and murdered since 2013. He stated, "We certainly have more than 100,000 people that were disappeared into and tortured to death in this machine. The Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets, is working at multiple sites, exhuming human remains packed in plastic bags. One location alone in Qutaifa is believed to hold at least 100,000 bodies."
طبعا في عنا أكثر من 100 يعني إبلاغ عن وجود مقابر جماعية. بيعتقد الناس إنه بكل نقطة عسكرية إنه في مقابر جماعية. أعداد اللي طلعوا من السجون كتير قليل وأعداد المفقودين كتير كبير.
Graveyards like Nasha and Qutaifa saw bodies dumped by refrigeration trucks in long trenches. Witnesses recall how the secret police prohibited anyone from approaching, labeling the victims as terrorists. Families of the disappeared are now demanding closure. Many have been searching for their loved ones since 2011, as Assad's brutal crackdown spiraled into a devastating war.
طبعا نحن عم نطالب منظمات دولية حقوقية، منظمة حقوق الإنسان تجي يا أخي تفتح لنا أخي هاي المقابر لحتى نعرف أولادنا يا أخي ميتين وينهم، هذا ابن مين وهذا ابن مين، ما نعرفانين.
International experts say uncovering the truth will take years. DNA testing is required to identify the remains, but with over 157,000 missing Syrians, The task is monumental. Human rights organizations are urging the international community to protect these sites and investigate. But for Syrians, the scars of war run deep as they continue their search for answers and justice. The mass graves paint a harrowing picture of Syria's darkest years. While Assad's regime has fallen, the road to accountability and closure for families is long and fraught with challenges. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates from the business world. Honda and Nissan have reportedly held exploratory talks regarding a potential merger. This move aims to enhance their ability to compete with electric vehicle manufacturers, especially in China. In March, the two Japanese automakers have agreed to explore a strategic partnership focused on EVs. Amazon workers in the US have voted to support industrial action, raising the possibility of a strike ahead of Christmas. The workers have claimed the online retail giant has refused to recognize their union. They also stated that the company has ignored a 15th of December deadline to initiate talks over their contract. According to a statement from the Teamsters, Amazon's facilities in Southern California, New York, and Illinois could be affected by the strike. It has been reported that the multinational corporation owning Jaguar Land Rover has arranged for a whistleblower to be dismissed. The whistleblower raised concerns about the safety of its electric cars. Confidential emails between executives at Tata Group have revealed they have retaliated against mechanical engineer Hazar Denli. Denli posted concerns on Reddit about lives being put at risk. As a result, he has been blacklisted. The Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates for the third time this year on Wednesday. This could potentially mark the last rate cut for several months. While the US economy remains resilient, with a steady job market and continued economic growth, inflation's progress towards the Fed's 2% target appears to have stalled. Google's newest artificial intelligence tool, Whisk, allows users to upload photos and receive a combined AI-generated image. This can be done without the need for any text input to explain what they want. Users can upload images depicting various subjects, settings, and styles. Whisk will then merge all these elements into a single cohesive image. The UK inflation rate has increased for the second consecutive month, with prices rising at their fastest rate since March. Inflation reached 2.6% in the year to November, according to the official figures. Fuel and clothing were among the main contributors to the rise, while higher ticket sales for gigs and plays also played a role. NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Barry Wilmore's journey back to Earth has been delayed yet again. Initially expected to return in February, they're now likely to stay aboard the ISS until spring 2025 due to repeated setbacks. Let's have a look at the report.
NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Barry Wilmore's return from the International Space Station has hit yet another delay, extending their stay in space to nearly 10 months. Originally set to return aboard Boeing's Starliner after just a week in orbit, technical issues have derailed the mission's timeline repeatedly. The Starliner, meant to mark a milestone for NASA's Commercial Crew program, successfully returned to Earth, but without the astronauts on board. NASA deemed it unsafe for Williams and Wilmore to return using the Starliner after malfunctions and leaks were detected. Now, SpaceX has stepped in with its Crew Dragon capsule, adjusting its Crew 9 mission to bring the astronauts home. The latest plan had them returning in February 2025, but that has now shifted to late March or even early April as SpaceX prepares a new capsule. The delays highlight both the challenges of space exploration and NASA's commitment to astronaut safety as they await a safe journey back to Earth. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We will now take a look at some news updates from Europe. After the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Bulgaria is attempting to force out Syrian asylum seekers. They are reportedly pressing them into signing voluntary return documents, sometimes with the use of violence. A humanitarian organisation has collected evidence on increased harassment of Syrian people on European borders. According to his upcoming autobiography, a plot to assassinate Pope Francis during a trip to Iraq was stopped following a tip-off from British intelligence. The Pope writes that after landing in Baghdad in March 2021, he was told of an event at which he was set to appear was being targeted by 2 suicide bombers. Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris has formally tendered his resignation. This is part of the formalities for the first sitting Dáil Éireann lower houses of Parliament. Mr. Harris visited Arras on Wednesday morning, where he submitted his resignation, although he will stay on the role until a new Taoiseach is appointed. The Cour de Cassation, France's highest upheld court, upheld former minister Nicolas Sarkozy's conviction for corruption and influence peddling. Sarkozy had appealed against the 2021 conviction in which he had been handed a 3-year prison sentence. 2 of the years were suspended, and Sarkozy would wear an electronic monitoring bracelet instead of going to prison for the last year. His lawyer said Sarkozy would appeal to the European Court of Human Rights to challenge the ruling. Finland is considering pulling out of an international agreement banning anti-personnel landmines. This is because of Russia's use of such weapons in Ukraine, leaving the 1997 Ottawa Treaty prohibiting the use of anti-personnel landmines would require majority backing by Finland's parliament. Quitting the agreement would enable Finland's military to start stockpiling mines again for the first time since the Nordic country signed the treaty in 2012. Denmark released anti-whaling activist Paul Watson from detention and had rejected a Japanese request to extradite him over criminal charges. These charges date back to more than a decade. Denmark's Justice Ministry said it had been biased based on its decision on an overall assessment. This includes an uncertainty over whether time spent in Greenland detention could be deducted from any final sentence in Japan. And that is all we have time for. We will be back soon with more news updates from across the world.